everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on Nikola Tesla technology in 21st century. The last day we launched a conference in Asanullah University. I was keynote speaker there. Over 100 startup as well as 20 professors they joined. World Talent Economy Forums around 10,000 student ecosystem they joins, and they are collaborating with our Nikola Tesla technology conference, and we are uplifting emerging technologies, and we are bringing different kind of talented in our business incubations. So your guideline, your advice, your thought process is very important for emerging economy youth communities. So Professor Rob and Mr. Dan, we have our keynote speaker for today's sessions. Professor Rob, what you want to discuss about Nikola Tesla technology? Most important thing is that when we do conference, we find the youth community, they are more interested about technology commercialization. They love to learn more how they can commercialize the technology, how they can get benefit for their startup and startup ecosystem. Uh, as you work for different largest company, I'm sure our audience will observe today's sessions. Uh, what is your advice? How they can improve the process?
Well, sure. And Nikola Tesla is kind of a cautionary tale. Unlike his peers, he had no real business sense, which became problematic for him throughout his life. He gambled away the money he was supposed to be using for college at a young age. When he came to the United States, he had 4 cents in his pocket. He met with Edison, convinced Edison that he could fix Edison's DC generators. Fixed the DC generators, and then Edison didn't pay him the $50,000 that he was owed. And that would have been a lot of money back then. Eventually, Tesla built his large electrical broadcast towers, $150,000 this time from JP Morgan. They didn't work. He did had a number of incredible inventions. His electrical engine is arguably still one of the best designs ever created today, and his theories on moving power were insightful, though his lack of knowledge of how geography and air and basically the world's environment worked kept him from getting the broadcast power thing right. But his ideas were good. His ability to monetize them were not, and it kind of showcases that one of the big problems that I think a lot of people have when they look at technology. They think that the idea is everything, and it's not. It's what is it? The old thing is 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration, and it's that perspiration part, actually bringing the product to market, that becomes important. And if you're going to try to get funding for something you're doing, you have to do most of the heavy lifting yourself. You have to have, unless you're part of a feeding frenzy, and we're right now in a generative AI feeding frenzy. And we had a similar feeding frenzy back on the internet bubble, where an awful lot of companies got funded that didn't have any good business fundamentals, and they burned through a lot of cash, and then they went out of business. I expect we're going to have a bunch of AI companies that'll pop up here and are popping up that will burn through a lot of money and go out of business as well, largely because they just don't have a great deal of business sense. And so making sure that you have people you're working with that understand how businesses run, how to staff them, how to protect intellectual property, how to bring a product to market, what channel theory is, and how to execute it, how to create logistics capability, supply lines, if you will, to make sure that your stuff can be built. You see a lot of things on the crowdfunding sites like Indiegogo, where people have come up with really decent ideas, and they get quite a bit of funding to carry the ideas forward, but the products never make it to market because they burn through their capital, and the product never gets built. And it just shows they have poor business fundamentals. One of the most interesting companies I ever covered was called the Panda Project. The spin out of a bunch of executives out of IBM, out of the old IBM PC company. And they created an innovative series of products. Their desktop computer looked like a scarab with most of the electronics on the floor, very attractive. And they had a passive backplane server that was built into a vault case, which would allow you to put it on the floor in a small business, have it be secure, and safe, and you could change the technology out with cards. In other words, if you wanted to go from Intel to ARM to another form of RISC processor, you just had to change a board out, and you had a level of flexibility that no machine had before or has had since. The level of lack of management, though, was unprecedented. They had hundreds of millions of dollars, and they burned through it by buying expensive offices, buying jets, taking company-funded super vacations. And by the time they were done, they'd run out of all their money. Even though they'd had great ideas and decent products, they still went under. So learning the business fundamentals and before you present to somebody you want to get funding from, being able to demonstrate that you understand how to run a business and that you have some demonstrated capability, being able to manufacture the products you want, or if it's software, be able to write the code that you need, and then are able to demonstrate that the stuff actually works. And finally, that there's a market for it. It's a lot easier to get funding if you have a viable business when you're asking for that funding than if you just simply have an idea and a series of concepts, but you don't have any structure. You can't demonstrate that you know how to do a P&L, let alone a balance sheet, and you have no operational experience. So the best advice, if you're going to try to bring something to market, is you need to heavy lift it a lot yourself. To at least show that the idea is viable and there's a market for it. And then from then you can ask for additional funding, and you're in better position to protect your ownership rights and your control over the company. One thing that often happens to young firms is they get into bed with a VC or an investing body, and then they discover that investing body controls the company and has no concept of what it is you wanted to do, and then wants to sell the company for its assets or sell the company off to somebody else to run it to get a quick profit. And suddenly your baby, the dream you had of having a great company that's doing amazing things, is lost because it's now gone on to somebody else who doesn't have that same passion and will undoubtedly drive it into the ground. A lot of the small companies that are acquired are simply acquired to get them off the market, so they don't become competitors for the company that's acquiring them. So understanding the dynamics of the market, making sure that you have the basic business fundamentals in place and can showcase that you can get to customers, you can supply customers, and there are enough customers there to grow your business are all critical to getting the funding you need to building a business. So there's my opening.
I guess it's my turn. Hey, Rob, those are really awesome points. Yeah, I think Tesla was either alternatively blessed or cursed with what's called an eidetic memory. He could basically it's what we also know as a photographic memory. And I think, it was like beyond that. He could actually build objects in his head, run them, and then take them apart and examine the parts for wear. This is a level of like eidetic memory that is practically unheard of. So I think maybe why I say it was possibly a curse is that he didn't have this business savvy, which obviously you alluded to. I think if you had that level of granular knowledge of the universe, you can miss the big picture. The old thing about not seeing the forest for the trees. I don't think Tesla could see the failings in human nature. I think he was kind of naive. He allowed himself to be repeatedly taken advantage of by the business community. But maybe he had kind of a naive faith in human nature, which I think a lot of people with specialized IQs or neurodivergent people. He was definitely what you would put on the neurodivergent spectrum. But he's still acknowledged as the world's greatest inventor by a lot of people. There's a robust community of Tesla coil builders. They have a great website called TeslaUniverse.com. And it's kind of sad that the maker movement and the amateur radio movement and the Tesla Coil Builder Society weren't around at the same time Tesla was around, because, oh my gosh, I think he would have, loved interacting with that. As it was, he ended up spending, his later years interacting with pigeons in the New Yorker hotel as kind of a hermit. I think he'd probably lost a lot of faith in human nature based on how people treated him. But again, he had over 200 patents. I'm just, at that teslauniverse.com website, you can browse through them. And, if he had taken perhaps just one of his most viable patents and made a minimum viable product, that's something that a lot of new businesses fail to do. They don't make a minimum viable product and then kind of stair step from there, kind of use that product to make the next most viable product. Business is a constant process of innovating out innovating the competition, and if you don't do that, you're probably not going to survive. Probably your business is not going to survive. In fact, 80% of small businesses, I think, fail within the first 5 years or so, and especially in the climate now, you have only about 6 months to make a really good profit on your product before it's going to get knocked off by someone who can make it cheaper. Maybe in China, they've got access to, a very underpaid workforce. So your business model has to take that into account. If you've got a good product, you better have the next good product 6 months later, because your first good product is going to be knocked off, and it'll probably mess up your business model. But the maker movement is and amateur radio. I just think that those are the two movements that I would really encourage people to explore and get involved with, because that, to me, has kind of the spirit of Nikola Tesla. He kind of had this peer-to-peer open source ethic that was pretty rare for that time. I mean, he wanted to make power freely distributable, almost like the too cheap to meter promise of nuclear power, where they thought, oh, nuclear power is going to be so cheap, we won't even have to meter it. That, of course, didn't turn out to be the case. In fact, we're facing a very dangerous situation with the spent fuel pond at all the nuclear plants, and especially the one where the dam has been destroyed in Ukraine. It's not being covered very much, but the head of the International Atomic Energy Union has said the water level on these cooling ponds, which there are 12. Now, this is not the reactors. The reactors are basically shut down and they're in sort of, idling mode. But the cooling ponds are these 12 massive ponds, bigger than football fields, and they're being sprayed with water. And if they aren't sprayed with water, they will get red hot, and the zircaloy metal cladding will actually combust. And inside these fuel rod bundles, there are petabecquerels of radiation. And if that combusts and becomes airborne in the melt and combustion process, this would be a disaster of unprecedented scale. If we'd had Tesla ideas of energy, we wouldn't be looking at these Rube Goldberg kind of ways of generating energy. So I just think the world community is going to have to come up with some way not to let this spent fuel cooling rod disaster happen. And it could really happen at any of the 400 plus plants around the world. They all have very unshielded pools, and the rods have to stay there for 10 years, basically till they become cool enough to go into what's called dry cask storage, where the latent heat will not actually melt the coating and cause a combustion. So a little bit of a deviation from the Tesla topic, but it's an important topic, and it ties back to Tesla because he was talking about safe, free, beneficial energy for mankind, and we thought nuclear energy might fulfill that promise, and actually it's not doing so well. Although I do want to say that there are designs for second generation reactors which are inherently safe. They use things like molten salt incorporated into the radiation working fluid, as it were. And if there's a problem, the salt will actually just solidify and shut down the reaction. So it's what's called inherent safety. Now, Tesla didn't always have inherent safety in his designs. There's a famous story about his mechanical resonator, which he was testing, which they called it later, I think they call it the earthquake machine, because if you create a pulse and then there's a resonant frequency and you amplify that resonant frequency at the right point of the wave, what you'll do is create the most efficient way to make the wave larger and larger. So Tesla was actually doing this with a little air pressure driven cylinder, and the building he was in was on the verge of actually coming down from these mechanical resonations, and the safety force burst through the door supposedly just as he was smashing the machine with a hammer to stop it. I guess he didn't have the off switch rigged up properly. So yeah, Tesla's lessons are still important and abundant in the world. We can learn a lot, not only from his life and his 200 patents, but from his mistakes and his different ways he interacted with and learned about human nature. So Amateur Radio Field Day is always the last full weekend in June. Tesla actually was probably the real inventor of radio. Marconi, of course, got to the patent office first, but I think it's been acknowledged that Tesla was the guy who had first come up with wireless communications before Marconi. So real quick on the Field Day, it's an annual event where people operate their communications stations off grid. So for the weekend, they set up in a park and they run off batteries or solar power. And then they usually are in a contesting mode where they're trying to make as many what are called QSOs as possible. And it's they call it radio sport in other parts of the world. So it's a great hobby, and it's a useful hobby because they are there when the centralized grid-based communications go down in disasters and things. So yeah, I think we owe a lot to Tesla if you're interested in the maker movement or the amateur radio movement or the helping humanity movement. I think all three of those converge in the legacy of Tesla. So that's my opening remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Rob. As you discuss about the commercializations and failure of Tesla to develop business or bring all of his technology to the industry, so how we can improve, especially the emerging economy has same kind of problem. Here we do not have enough good relations in between industry and academy. They're also struggling. So how USA community they grow, how in USA industry and academy work together and they bring more success for commercialization, especially their new innovation.
Well, most of the large companies here in the U.S. have relationships with a number of the large universities here in the U.S. as well, funding relationships where the universities work on projects that the companies are interested in, and the government, of course, has research projects through the Department of Defense and the Department of Transportation that do similar things that fund university efforts to look into areas that they're interested in, whether it's advanced transportation or advanced weapon systems, or different ways to build processors, or different ways to build batteries, for instance. These joint research efforts create a certain amount of migration of knowledge between the universities and the companies, and create unique intern opportunities for the students that are working on the projects to be able to work in and with the companies that are helping them develop, or that they're helping to develop some of these technologies and advancements. So it's a very, for the larger firms, it's a very symbiotic relationship between the schools and the companies, and that allows the schools to get additional funding for projects, and help fund the school, and hopefully help keep tuition low, or at least lower than it otherwise would be, and the companies get the benefit of research that they don't have to pay for directly through their own research organizations, which often can be much more costly. So you get that level of cooperation and migration of talent between the two entities. It provides a kind of an advancement path for the students that are working on the project, so that they've got jobs when they come out of college. Often the students that work on these things end up working for the companies that funded them, And of course they're big believers in the activity, and they help assure that funding will continue as they work with the companies they've ended up with. Excuse me. So it's much more symbiotic.
Thank you. Mr. Markley, what you want to discuss about Nikola Tesla?
What's the discussion point on today? I hear y'all were talking about the connection between business and the different nations and everything. Of course, we know Mr. Tesla was a great innovator. As I pointed out before, there are a number of folks that were in that innovation space that oftentimes aren't remembered as much as they should be. And I had pointed out to Booker T. Washington and definitely even some of the other great ones like George Washington Carver out of the African American community that also did not get the recognition that they probably deserved at the time that they were around and all in that way. So definitely, I think that a lot of times we have to honor these legends of ours, but also understand what they were doing. And a lot of times they were not recognized at the time that they were alive. And I think that even Rob would agree with that as well. But that's one of the things that I have observed, and would be interested to hear what other folks' thoughts are. And if there are any direct questions that you have from our experiences here in North Carolina, I may be able to address those.
Thank you. Mr. Dan.
You're on mute, Dan.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, in my earlier comments, I said I think Nikola Tesla kind of embodied the open source ethic and the maker movement ethic. And I was just browsing through that TeslaUniverse.com site, and one of his quotes really struck me. I'll just quote it here. He said, in 1934, Nikola Tesla said this: "The desire that guides me in all I do is the desire to harness the forces of nature to the service of mankind." Unquote. So, he was in his later life when he said that, but it's profound that after all the betrayals and and shenanigans that he had to put up with, he still had that open source ethic, to the service of mankind. And really, that's a beautiful ethic that I think all the great teachers and all the great leaders of mankind have had a similar ethic. Not everyone has it, unfortunately, but we should be propagating that ethic. It almost is a biblical idea. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And some people might elevate Tesla to the status of, of a kind of prophet almost. He certainly has a great reputation that's still echoing through history. But yeah, he could teach us a lot of lessons, and even his failures, of course, can teach us lessons. As Rob was saying, he was taken advantage of. Perhaps he was naive in his business practices. Well, not perhaps, but pretty clearly. So yeah, the beautiful thing about the universe is that everything is a potential learning and teaching experience. The old quote is like, "Oh no, not another learning experience." But actually, we should be grateful for everything the universe does, because we can make it a learning and a teachable moment. And the faith called pantheism is that we're in kind of a conscious, infinite, loving universe, and I think that's a great way to look at the universe with an attitude of gratitude. And I think Tesla must have had a similar kind of belief system for his life, attests to that. Have you all guys been interested in Tesla for a while, or that'd be kind of interesting to hear? When did you guys first hear about Tesla and his work? Was it at?
I heard about him back in school. He was covered back in talking about the latest iteration of the Industrial Revolution. So certainly was a part of that. But he's a cautionary tale with regard to mental health. From 1912 on, he was clearly experiencing some severe problems. Post-diagnosis with his having obsessive compulsive disorder. He could only do things in threes. Before he ate, he had to pile all the napkins in the center of the table. He had a love affair with a pigeon who died in his arms, and he saw the light pass out of its eyes, and it crushed him. You couldn't get him to touch hair if you held a gun to his head, and pearl earrings would set him off like nothing. So he had issues, and even though he's credited with creating a whole bunch of technology, he didn't financially benefit from any of it, really. A little bit, but not enough. And he died deeply in debt at 86 in New York, and pretty much batshit crazy at that time. Everything, all his material that was in the room when he died was absconded with by the Department of Defense, and it's never seen the light of day since. The theory is he was working on a death ray that was funded by Russia to the tune of about $24,000 because the U.S. and Europe didn't want to fund it, and the reason that at least the theory is the reason they absconded with that material is they didn't want anybody else developing a death ray, which probably is a good thing. The underlying concept, which falls within the guidelines or at least the concept of an EMP, might have worked. At least from the standpoint of being able to disable aircraft. It originally started off as being a weapon that was designed to disable aircraft in large numbers, and clearly after the First and Second World War, both of which had large aircraft components, at least at the end of the First World War, and then the Second World War, you had the German Blitzkrieg. So having a weapon that could take out large numbers of approaching aircraft, as opposed to radar, which just identified them, would have been incredibly handy. But who knows how far he got, and whether the thing was even viable when he was done. As they say, that the material, to my knowledge, has never seen the light of day since it was taken. He is kind of a cautionary tale with regard to mental health.
There's all those. I was just going to mention. Have you heard all these conspiracy theories? Like, one is that Trump's nephew got the time travel data from Tesla, and the other one is the big Siberian forest that got knocked down. That was supposedly Tesla trying to send an aerial signal to Admiral Byrd or to the North Pole Explorer, and it went off course. And it was a scalar wave. Anyway, there's a lot of far out conspiracy theories around Tesla. I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
There are a lot of conspiracy theories.
No problem. There's always interesting conspiracy theories that exist and everything. I was just wondering if a lot of the interest, even in other countries like definitely Bangladesh and Malaysia and a number of other places, isn't because of the connection of the business of Tesla to Elon Musk. And a lot of people are trying to figure out, how he became the richest person in the world and exactly what he is doing with the Tesla company and all along those lines. So I do sometimes wonder if the interest isn't because of the fact that we've got one of the world's richest man that is definitely associated with the business end of it and everything, because apparently he just ended his days as the world's richest person for the first time in 6 months. So apparently somebody has replaced him as the richest person, and I'd be curious to see who that is.
He just became the world's richest person again in the last couple of days. So it kind of bounces around. But do recognize, remember, Tesla existed before Musk joined the company.
Right.
He joined the company. So he wasn't the founder, and it really has very little to do with Nikola Tesla. They're using the name, but the connecting it to Nikola Tesla is at best a stretch.
Right.
It's because there's a kind of a connection name only, and Musk's capability has very little to do with technology. You certainly heard the stuff that's coming out of Twitter, where basically the people he's working with say he has no clue what it is he's doing. He's good at marketing, and he's great at raising capital, and that's really how he's kind of built the empire. He's a good pitchman, and so he's been able to get funding for SpaceX, the Boring Company, And then some of the Solar City, of course, and if you remember, Solar City was about to go under when Tesla bought it, which resulted in a whole series of lawsuits as a result. So Musk is one of these guys that lives on the cutting edge. He's mostly hype, not a ton of substance, but some of the things he's done has worked out. And largely the things that work out the best are the things that he tends not to spend a whole lot of time touching, like SpaceX. It's pretty much autonomous. The only time he's mucked with that was when a bunch of SpaceX engineers popped up and said they needed to get rid of Musk because he was damaging the brand, and then they all got fired. Which makes me a little less confident in what those SpaceX rockets are going to be doing in the future, since each one of the people that were fired were critical to the effort. So he's an interesting piece of work. I don't envy anybody that's ever worked for that guy. And certainly, as you followed, he's had a number of children from the different executives that report to him, which at some particular point has got to come back to nail him, because that is under U.S. law that is absolutely inappropriate. But he's one of those folks that seems to be operating outside of the typical envelope of an executive, and as we saw yesterday, sometimes that can end badly. So we'll see how it goes with Musk, but not a huge connection to Tesla.
No, but I think that some people, because of the name, whether it is the electric car or whether it is that particular company or whether it is a number of other things, don't do enough of that research, because definitely I have done a little bit of the research and see what y'all are saying about his history and everything. But I think a lot of people are kind of like we do with our politics. They do only that surface thing. So they hear the name and they're like, well, he must be associated with one and the other, even though a lot of his early research.
Tesla brand is big at the moment. So and since it came from Nikola Tesla, the brand did, the connection would be obvious. So yeah, you're probably right. Is the success of the car company, which has been outstanding. I mean, if you think about it, GM had electric cars on the road before there was Tesla, and then GM killed their effort, and then Tesla popped up and pretty much owned, still does, the electric car business worldwide. They're really the only major threat to Tesla right now is coming out of China. Some of the Chinese cars are phenomenal and cheaper. So we'll see how they weather that particular storm. But so far, the existing car companies haven't really come all that close to Tesla's capability or pricing. It's kind of amazing. It reminds me a lot of what happened with Apple and the cell phone companies when they brought out the iPhone. They ran against giants and including Microsoft, and they toasted all of them. As a much weaker company at the time. And Tesla did pretty much the same thing in the electric car space. So it's an interesting company to watch.
Yeah. What do you think Nicholas would be thinking about the charging stations? Because I know a lot of people that are excited about the electric cars because of their environmental way of helping the environment. But then people are wondering about the cost factor and the fact that there are not enough charging stations in the world as of yet, even though more and more of them are coming up. And who knows, maybe there'll be a time that we don't have a gas station at every corner, but we instead have a charging station at every corner. I don't know how the gas industry is going to feel about that and all in that space. But I just wonder, what do you think, Nicholas?
Locally, one of our communities just went to war against the city that wanted to put in a gas station, and they're screaming, saying, "Why are we putting in gas stations? We should be putting in electric charging stations instead." It's been quite a fun. If it was Tesla, he'd be talking broadcast power. This whole idea of charging stations and batteries, that wasn't consistent with his view. His view was you should be able to broadcast power and power things that way. The battery technology up through the time that Tesla died was very poor. Lead acid was the dominant form of batteries, and that's what powered the initial electric cars back in the early 1900s. But Tesla was a firm believer not in charge, store, and use, but in broadcast power. So you only used the power that you needed, and you didn't have the loss from storage, nor did you have to deal with the inefficiencies of battery technology. To my knowledge, he never worked on batteries. He was a firm believer in using some form of broadcast power in order to power the electrics of the world. He was early on in robotics as well, which would have had much the same problem. And so his view of these charging stations and batteries would have been negative. He would have argued for a completely different approach.
And what would that approach have been? Because when I think of broadcast power, being an old radio head and everything, I'm like trying to think of how I'm thinking of like radio power and radio waves, and I don't think that's what you have in mind. But I'm not
Oh
sure.
no, it is. That's how broadcast power kind of today. That's kind of how broadcast power works. It creates a wave, and then you've got a receiver that takes that wave and converts it back into electricity. And so far, with regard to range, we've got broadcast power that can run IoT devices, can kind of sustain a smartphone, but not charge it. So our ability to run a car is still not there. Though this week they just had a demonstration of being able to broadcast power from orbit that worked. It was a viable demonstration. It showcased that the technology can work using microwaves, and it showed the technology could work. And if you understand how you could use orbital power stations, which wouldn't have to deal with clouds, wouldn't have to deal with Earth's rotation. They could always be in view of the, depending how far out you had them, would always be in view of the sun. It would be a significant power source. And the issue has always been, how do you get the power without a tether? How do you get the power economically from orbit down to the surface of the planet? And of course, you've got the other little problem being that if somebody comes into contact with the beam, how do you assure that they don't just burst into flames spontaneously? Because it's a lot of power in a fairly negative, a fairly small area, but that could all be worked. So that's kind of where we are with broadcast power. Most of what you see today is inductive wireless power, which is close proximity. That's when you have your charging of your iPhone when you don't use a cable. That's inductive power, and they've had inductive power chargers for autonomous cars for a while. And they've been working on putting coils into roads and into parking stations so that cars can charge inductively while they drive or while they're parked. Other things they're looking at is robotic chargers that which it might be cheaper. Because if you're going to put it into an existing parking structure, you'd have to raise the floors, drop the cable, pretty pricey. But the robotic charger then finds the car that needs the charging, goes up and charges the car, and then when it's done, goes and finds another car, which would address one of the problems we've had with chargers, which is charger camping, where somebody goes shopping while they've got the car plugged in. Their car is fully charged, but nobody else can pull the charger out of their car until they get back, and that means that charger is not available for anybody else, which is problematic. And then we've got charger camping, where somebody in a gas-powered car parks next to the charger, so nobody else can use it, which has been something that's been annoyingly popular in the middle part of the country. So we've had issues. If we could get broadcast power to work, it would solve a crap load of problems with regard to autonomous electric cars.
Speaking of a crap load of problems, and you mentioned it earlier, and I was watching a science fiction novel about it and everything, and a lot of people think it is still science fiction and all in that space, but you did mention that Tesla was into this notion of time travel and everything. So Reverend Daniel and definitely Rob and everything, is there any possibility that we are actually going to see time travel anytime in our lifetime or the lifetime of our offsprings, or in the case of my situation, since I don't have any natural offsprings, my nephews and all along those lines? So is there any possibility that this will be a reality, or is it still going to be the thing of Rob Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, meaning that it is strictly a work of fiction?
Well, I've heard that time travel would only be possible from the point of the invention of the first time machine forward. So you couldn't travel back before there were time machines, because that would apparently violate all kinds of causalities and things like that. But I think probably what happens is you would branch into a separate timeline rather than, and that also would eliminate the grandfather paradox, so called. The old joke is like, what if I go back in time and shoot my grandfather? Well, you could do that, but you wouldn't kill him. You would just injure him in a way that he gives birth to kids who are bad shots. Is that's one of the ways of a humorous way of dealing with the grandfather paradox of time travel. But again, there's that conspiracy theory that Donald Trump's uncle John Trump was someone who got a hold of Tesla's. I think he was like supposedly the first guy that got into Tesla's room after he died. So there's all kinds of QAnon types that go, oh, see, that proves that that's why Trump got so famous and stuff. His uncle used the Tesla time travel to give him an advantage. But that other conspiracy about the Tunguska event, which was in 1908, was that Tesla was trying to send a signal to Peary, the Arctic explorer, with his Wardenclyffe Tower in 1908. And that's when there was this huge shockwave that knocked down the trees in Siberia for a 100-mile radius. And people go, oh, well, that was a comet that vaporized in the upper atmosphere, and the shockwave did that. But anyway, a couple interesting Tesla conspiracies. That's probably a whole other show topic. But again, on the microwave power transmission thing, of course, they didn't have microwaves when Tesla was inventing. But yeah, you can get like 80% efficiency through microwave transmission reception, even from orbit. It's a DC to DC conversion, and you can actually phase the receiver and the transmitter so you don't have birds flying into the beam and exploding. you can keep the power density levels low enough. Although this is another kind of interesting, quasi conspiratorial thing, is that we are electric beings, and right now the health safety standards for our radio frequency power density, it only takes into account the surface heating effects. Like, is your skin actually getting hotter from intercepting the radio energy? So this is probably not the best standard to use, because we know that cells use electrical potentials on the order of microvolts to turn on and off ionic channels in the cell wall, calcium channels, and some people say autism used to be about 1 in 10,000. Now it's like about I think 1 in 40 is like autistic. So they're thinking, well, maybe all this radio frequency smog is having some explanation.
Because you mentioned the microwave earlier, and I know that it sounds like the microwave could be conceivably used to power some things, like maybe even power cars and things along those lines. And I do remember the days of the supercomputers that took up pretty much a entire room and all. And we know that now there are small laptops and even phones that have this tremendous computer power. But to your point, Reverend Daniel, I was going like, wait a minute. I do remember that the microwaves a lot of people are not the biggest fans. And even though I have a microwave here in my apartment, of those microwaves for exactly that reason, because they're worried about the impact of the microwave on their own body, and not just on the food, but also their own body. And I'm going like, well, if we have a super microwave that is going to power a car, that would be even worse kind of situation in that space, because I know a lot of people just with their home microwaves are concerned about the impact it can have on their health, because we are definitely made up of water and also electrical beings as well. So a combination of both of those are reasons that people are concerned. And like I said, it's a wonderful convenience, because I'm not gonna lie, I used it to heat up some potatoes yesterday. So it can be a wonderful convenience, but it can also be problematic in its health risk and all as well.
Yeah, and you could buy a little tri-field meter pretty cheap now to test for electronic smog around your environment. They call it a tri-field because it's measuring radio frequency, electrostatic, and I don't know, what's the third kind of a field that a tri-field measures? Do you know, Rob?
It would be magnetic.
Yeah, maybe it's electromagnetic, RF, and electrostatic. I think those are the three.
So, yeah, makes sense.
But yeah, it's like, well, I've got one of these little inductive chargers for my iPhone, and oh my God, I held the meter up to that. It was like, blinking red. So, things like motors put off incredible electromagnetic fields. Electric blankets might be very bad, because of course electromagnetic radiation obeys what's called the inverse square law, which is when you double the distance, you half the radiation. So that's why being close to a source of radiation is like the main thing that really affects the exposure level on that. But
yeah, that makes sense. Hey, Rob, what do you think Tesla would think about the environment right about now? Because I know a lot of people throughout the country and even the world are concerned about air quality. We've got this lovely Canadian fire that is impacting people's thoughts and all in that space. So I'm just wondering if he was living on this particular day and time, what he would be thinking about the air quality and how we are being impacted by something that is seemingly very far away, but is impacting a lot of us here in the United States. I know definitely my friends in New York have been impacted, but we've been having some air quality issues here in North Carolina. And I think it's even going down as far as Florida and other parts of the country as well. But what do you think Tesla's view of this would be?
Much of Tesla's life, the information surrounding climate change was suppressed. He wasn't a chemical engineer, nor was he an environmental engineer. So he was an electrical engineer. So his path, and he's inventing the spark plug. So he certainly had a connection to internal combustion engines. I mean, being somewhat pragmatic, he probably again would have just highlighted the fact that if he could just get his broadcast power thing to work, it would solve all problems. Go to either nuclear or hydroelectric power as a way to eliminate the gases, the creation of the environmental problems. So yeah, I think that would be the path. Given he was an electrical engineer, it's like anything else. Whatever your expertise is, if you're an expert on hammers, everything looks like a nail. He was an electrical engineer, so he would probably approach this from the area of his competence and certainly suggest and be supportive of the move towards electric cars. Though, as I say, he would probably be aggressively pushing for a broadcast power, knowing full well, or at least he undoubtedly would read up on the fact that batteries are the most problematic aspect of an electric car when it comes to pollution. Both the creation of the batteries and the eventual disposal of the batteries are problematic. So yeah, that's probably where he would be. Broadcast power, electric cars, centralize power generation, stop the petrochemical generating plants and convert them over to something else. Probably would have been a supporter of geothermal generation, which when just recently we had a breakthrough with regard to drilling, where now apparently we can drill the very deep wells that you need to drill for a geothermal much more cheaply. And if you can bring down the cost of the wells, you can bring down the cost of building the geothermal plants. And geothermals is one of the relatively small number of ecologically sound ways to generate power that runs 24/7. Much of what we use now, whether it's solar or wind, doesn't run 24/7. It just runs for a few hours during the day, which makes it somewhat inefficient. It means you have to have storage. And the farther we can get away from storage until we can get to solid state batteries, the better off we're probably going to be, because there's just a lot of energy wasted in storage. And as I mentioned, lithium ion, which is the favorite now for very dense energy storage, is not clean in its creation and is not clean in its disposal at the moment, and the recycling efforts are still pretty much just starting off. So we've got issues, and being able to solve that storage problem or eliminate it would probably be where Tesla was focused.
I just found an interesting article about Tesla. It was actually written 10 years ago and all in that space, but I'm going to read part of it and y'all can tell me what y'all think about it. But apparently the article is entitled Why Nikola Tesla is a Hero to the Man's Rights Activist. So the article said Nikola Tesla is celebrated as a genius who had an amazing ability to envision the future. He predicted cell phones, television, and even elements of the internet long before any of these things existed. But he also had some weird ideas.
Science fiction writers did as well.
But he also had some weird ideas about the social issues of tomorrow, which is why he's become an unlikely hero in the so-called man's right community of today. Despite his brilliance with all things technological, Tesla's views on the social structure of the future were somewhat rather unfortunate. He advocated for the principles of eugenics and for sterilization to ensure that only humans with the most desirable traits could reproduce, and he insisted that men would one day be forced to submit to women. The inventor imagined a society structure like that of the bee, where male grunts do the heavy lifting and are otherwise only used for breeding purposes. Men would be killed off when they were not needed. Tesla spelled out his ideas about the inevitable and his in his opinion, unfortunate rise of women in an interview that appeared in the August 10th, 1924 issue of the Galveston Daily News. He once explained that he once adored and worshiped women, but that his perspective had recently changed as women have become more and more like men, striving to compete with men in so many aspects of society. Now, the soft-voiced, gentle woman of my reverent worship has all but vanished, Tesla told a reporter in 1924. In her place has come the woman who thinks that her chief success in life lies in making herself as much as possible like man in dress, voice, and actions, in sports and achievements of every kind. Tesla would
Well,
go on
you
to
remember that
explain.
was something of the times. The way things were through much of Tesla's life was women were subservient to men. They stayed home and had babies. The men went out and worked. And his theory was that given that situation and the women are in repose, their mental capacity would increase. And at some particular point, they'd be smarter than men, which would become men would become a disposable commodity. And he was particularly annoyed by the fact that women were getting rights. Their subordinate position was being removed. They were becoming a true force on the political landscape. But a lot of people don't like change, given the nature of his obsessions, he was undoubtedly a guy that didn't like change at all. Even though he was a change agent, which is kind of ironic, but not unusual. And so his opinions with regard to men and women were really kind of set when he was a child, based on the conditions that existed back then, and he didn't like the fact that it was changing. From my understanding of reading his history, as I said, the only romance that I know that he had in his later years was with a pigeon. Women's earrings, particularly pearl earrings, would make him would drive him insane. And Lord save him if a woman's hair ever touched him. He just no. So the king of romance he wasn't. But
Doesn't sound like he was definitely not
his
a Romeo.
his views were couched by his upbringing, which is a
And
common.
apparently he was very much attached to his mom, because I think his mom was a major factor in his life. I did read that as well, that he was very
who sadly
dear.
died, and his brother, who was at least he would say was more capable than he was, but died at 12 in an unfortunate accident, and the accident certainly had a major impact on Tesla.
Well, just along those same lines, I imagine, because Tesla was from a area of the world that has had some repressive politics and everything, I imagine that he would have some issues with some of the racism that his company has been accused of, because I know recently the Tesla company has run into some things with their African-American workers in their California Tesla plant, and people are,
Let's put it this way: Musk isn't a big fan of diversity and inclusion, and we'll leave it at that. So Tesla, the company, has had a number of issues with regard to the care and feeding of employees. Cal OSHA pretty much drove Tesla out of California because during the pandemic, because Tesla wanted people to continue to come in and work. And Cal OSHA wanted people home until the pandemic was addressed, and Musk had a major problem. I'm kind of surprised he's moving to Florida, but nothing really to do with Nikola Tesla. It's just Musk's view on diversity and inclusion, and any of that stuff he's clearly on fairly far right, almost the insane right on his views.
Yeah, and I think there was kind of a current of social scientific organizing society, like, oh, look at ants and bees. They have this hive, and it's very efficient, and so we should organize our society like a hive. In fact, my brother once, posed this question at a Star Trek convention to Gene Roddenberry, and Gene's answer was, "Yeah, some people think the ant and bee hive is utopia. I would tend to
created the
disagree."
Borg.
Yeah, right.
I mean, wasn't there a whole science fiction group around that, the Borg and all of that?
Borg, the Borg was it's a hive.
Did Roddenberry create the Borg, or was that done by the follow-on guys?
Well, no, it was during the Borg came up during Next Generation, and Roddenberry was still around for Next Generation. So I was just watching. If you ever get a chance, watch the video that Will Wheaton does.
He's that great podcast.
Which is titled William expletive deleted Shatner, and he talks about how he was working the show and he wanted to meet William Shatner, and William Shatner was a complete dick to him. I mean, just really what William Shatner said to Will Wheaton, somebody should have taken William Shatner out behind a shed and beat the crap out of him. That was just mean. No reason for that. But it's an interesting video, and if you want some of the background of what went on Next Generation, some of the other things, it's because Wheaton talks about his friendship with Roddenberry during the event. But yeah, Roddenberry was around through Next Generation.
Yeah, Roddenberry, yeah, definitely. And of course, there was that other side of the quotes in that regards, because I think it was one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement that basically told Lieutenant her to stay on Star Trek with the earlier versions because of the way that she was enhancing the views and getting many of the minorities to actually even think about going into science and a number of other things that they might not have considered. Because I think there was a point.
Oh yeah, Nichelle Nichols. She was going to quit, and I think Martin Luther King Jr. talked about it.
Dr. Sam. Yeah, that's a famous.
Which
famous.
Yeah. And, another thing on this, getting back to the wireless power transmission, there's a great book I read back in the 80s called The Future of Flight. And this actually was a concept where you leave the power source on the ground and you just beam the power to the vehicle. And this can be done with systems like the laser launcher system, where the laser would actually vaporize ice, and you'd get this 1,000 times steam expansion. So you have a steam rocket that drives the vehicle into orbit. Or for airplanes, you have a receiver on the bottom of the airplane, and then a maser, which is a microwave laser, and it can track the airplane as it flies, and then it can be tracked by another microwave laser as it flies to the next cell, I guess. So that would be one way of achieving Tesla's dream of power on demand. And I think another thing that Tesla probably would have advocated would be a power grid that's connected around the world, because you have the day and the night side have different power demand curves. There's usually a surplus on the night side and a deficit on the day side. So if you could connect the day and the night side of the planet, you would get this load balancing, which would drop the price of electricity dramatically. And then the other thing he probably would have liked would be a world monetary unit based on the kilowatt hour, because everyone uses kilowatt hours. It would make sense to have that instead of, the dollar is right now the world money standard. But why not have an electricity energy based money standard? It's far more practical and universal. So I think
Bitcoin kind of was that. I mean, if you think about how Bitcoins are mined, they're mined by wasting electricity. So there is certainly a connection between Bitcoin and electricity, but not necessarily.
In a way, Bitcoin is kind of a kilowatt hour money.
It could be a kilowatt hour money. Do you think that Tesla, because as I mentioned as I was reading that article, his thoughts around the cell phone, but do you think he envisioned the cell phone as we have it now, which is like a mini computer that oftentimes has the capacity of some of these giant computers? When I was talking about those computers that took up entire rooms and everything. So do you think he envisioned it as being as small?
He really died before we had much in terms of computers. As far as I can tell in my reading, he didn't have much of a connection to the computer revolution, even the early efforts. But he was gone before IBM rose, and or at least before the mainframe rose. And so I don't. It's hard to conceive of something when you don't even have a foundation for that conception. And while the World's Fair in 1921 did have quite a robotics section, and Tesla was aggressive on robotics. Again, robots were a little different than computers. Computers at the time were kind of like super calculators, and at least from what I can tell, he just didn't seem to show any interest in that aspect of it. So he clearly got that radio was going to be handheld at some particular point in time, and eventually after he died, he got credit for inventing the radio. Thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I haven't seen a connection between him and any form of computational device. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I'm not aware of one.
It's interesting. We usually think science fiction writers are so prescient about the future, but no science fiction writer predicted the personal computer. They always wrote about giant mainframes off somewhere in a centralized building. But
that's what they knew.
Yeah.
When they were writing, it's kind of what they knew. And you go back to Edgar Rice Burroughs, there's really no computer aspect of anything that I can recall that he wrote during that time. I was a big Burroughs fan. But not a lot in that earlier work. Arthur C. Clarke certainly touched on it, but not until after computers were created. I can't think of anybody that was really talking about portable computing. But remember, back in the 50s, even those people that were in the computing industry argued that there was a market for maybe 3 computers in the world, and the concept of a personal computer was just brain dead stupid. And you can just find quote after quote of the time talking about things that could have been smartphones or personal computers that people just thought, there's no market for that crap. What's the point? And of course, virtually all those companies where their CEOs had those views are gone now.
Yeah, I think Bill Gates said, 64 kilobytes should be enough memory for anybody.
Oh, yeah, that was
That's like back in the early 80s.
Or the old 8086. I mean, who even needs that computing power? What are we going to do with that massive capability? And our smartphones are so much more powerful than that now. It's like anything else. You have to, and remember the guy that ran the patent office said there's no reason to submit any more patents because everything that's been invented has been invented.
Yeah.
And that was what, in the 1930s or something. So he was friggin' wrong. Just one thing to remember: when somebody says it's the end and nothing is going to happen after that, they're going to be wrong.
Well, apparently there was a 1926 Collier's Magazine interview where Tesla predicted, as the editors wrote, communicating instantly by simple vest pocket equipment. So that's pretty much the cell phone there. Yeah.
But that was radio. So he understood radio, and he certainly understood that the technology could be miniaturized. So because there was nothing that kept it from being miniaturized other than the fact that it used vacuum tubes as opposed to transistors at the time. But he certainly could see that you could make stuff smaller.
But I think he also kind of conceived of what's called netocracy, because he thought this worldwide communication would bring an end to war and all other kinds of.
That certainly worked out.
Yeah.
The internet certainly solved all our information and communications problems. It is funny how we look back at some of these pronouncements and discover that not really.
Well, I think really he was talking about amateur radio, because he said all the majority of ills from which humanity suffers are due to the immense extent of the terrestrial globe and the inability of individuals and nations to come into close contact. So the internet does not really put you into close contact. There's all this bad behavior on the internet, of course.
No, and there's bad behavior on the internet. And as I recall, and I was briefly into it and tried to I think I might have even had one as a kid. I can't remember if I did or did not. But isn't some of this a modern technology that everybody's excited about, and that is oftentimes a diversity of views, but oftentimes there's also a lot of conflict conversation as well. Nothing but a greater version of a ham radio, because that's what I was referring to, that I think I had a ham radio at one time or another. But what is the true difference between, say, ham radio and a clubhouse or a Discord room? It's pretty much the same concept. It's just a little bit greater amount of people that are involved in it. Whereas ham might have been maybe a couple of thousand, and clubhouse room might be a tens of thousands, if not closer to a million or so here and there. So
now keep in mind, you're not broadcasting on amateur radio. Maybe you're thinking of CB radio, where people tend to get into this quirky style of one-upmanship and stuff. But amateur radio is actually a pretty polite and self-policing hobby. And people they typically ask, "Oh, what's your equipment you're running, and what's conditions are like?" And, "Hey, can we send you I'll send you one of my postcards from my station, and will you send me a postcard from your station?" They're called QSL cards. I think it's there's about 1 million operators worldwide, and like I said, it's a hobby that's is kind of being revived by digital communication modes, software-defined radio. I mean, it used to be dying hobby with old guys and their tube equipment, but now the whole advent of connecting it to computers is actually kind of reviving the hobby. And,
I didn't see that, but interesting. No, I got involved in ham radio a while back and had got a license, but I never did much with it. But it seemed to me most of the people that were involved at the time were my age or older, and I said, "Yeah, well, if I want to talk to somebody, I'll pick up the phone."
Yeah, well,
Were there a lot of, and like I said, it's been ages since I've been involved in it, and that's why I made the parallel, and maybe I'm making a wrong parallel, but I thought that there were some topic-oriented conversations in the early day of ham radio, just like there are in some of these social media sites as well, because I thought that, as I recall, that there were some people that were into ham radio that might have a shared interest, whether that was birds or whether that was an interest in
but it's a one-to-one. It's a one-to-one communications medium, so that it's not a broadcast medium. So we're internet's kind of more broadcast, but at least on social media it is. But you had interest groups. Most of the interest groups seem to revolve around ham radio, but you had interest groups that surrounded the technology. I struggle with the purpose of it right now. It made a lot of sense in the 40s and 50s. It just as we drop into current technology, if you want to talk to somebody, you can. Though, granted, if we had a national disaster, a Terminator moment where robots took over the world, it would very likely be. And remember the movie Terminator? That's kind of who hooks everybody else up. It's the old defense stations and amateur radio operators that create the network for the rebellion against the machine. So there are some connections, at least in science fiction, to the value of ham radio operators.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your cell phone grid can get overloaded just from too many people trying to use it at the same time.
True.
I mean, if there's an accident on the highway, everyone's saying, "Oh my God, I can't get through," because everyone's trying to get through. But amateur radio doesn't suffer from
Rob
that
just
grid
wants to
overload.
go back to ham radio, and he also wants to go back to the Lee Tomlin phone operator, because I just dated myself, but that was a phone operator that was over there with no
party to whom I'm
that
speaking.
would give you the party line and the whole 9 yards around, those kind of things.
It goes back, but we're off topic, and now we're kind of overtime too. We're supposed to wrap at 10, so we're 10 over. So, Sharif,
Right.
you may want to wrap this up.
KK6 VDR monitoring.
Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you for joining today's session. This is very interesting dialogues, and I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Mark Lee. Thank you, Mr. Rob, and thank you, Mr. Dan, for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye, and take care.